Rachel Greszler, research fellow in economics, budgets, and entitlements at the Grover M. Hermann Center for the Federal Budget, part of Heritage, of course, joins me now. What's in? What's missing? You know, Rachel, unfortunately, I'm not that fast a reader that at 8:50 a.m. I can read 106 pages before 9:03 and get started with the show. So help me out here. What's going on?
Yeah, good morning, David. Well, unfortunately, I'm not any faster of a reader here, but, I think one of the biggest things that's missing in this whole debate over what to do with police reform is acknowledging that policing is a state issue. States have the power and authority to establish and enforce the laws to protect their people and the safety and welfare. And we have over 18,000 local police departments nationwide. And so regardless of what the federal government does, they can put into place any number of policies and prohibitions for police officers. But if you don't get down to that local level and look at this one problem that Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey has called the elephant in the room and the nearly impenetrable barrier, which is those local police union contracts, if you don't look at those, then whatever you put into place, if those departments can't or won't enforce those provisions that are implemented at the federal level, then you're not going to have any impact. You won't reduce violence, and you won't change the culture that allows police abuse to occur with impunity.
All right, so let's take parts of this. And again, no one, well, unless you've spent your time reading, which you can in the last hour, has had a chance to fully digest this. But once again, Washington writes a bill. So let's take some of the elements of this. What from the federal level can they actually do? And I'll remind people that the political component of this from the Obama years is that while Eric Holder and Barack Obama and then Loretta Lynch were touting the issue, they did very little, if anything, about a key component, which was the police unions, which often, like many unions, would support Democrats and sometimes even against their very membership. And they never tackled that issue because of the political support. Let's be very honest about the politics of this. So now how do you tackle those police unions and those contracts? Some have tried. NYPD has tried. Other departments have tried because there's also a budget problem, a pension fund problem. There's a lot of issues.
Yeah, there are. And as you said, some have tried and some have tried unsuccessfully. In San Antonio, a reformer was in there and wanted to get in place some things that would have helped to change the culture and to reduce these isolated instances of abuse. And yet the union stepped in, and not only can they withdraw their political contributions, they can launch multi-million-dollar attack ad campaigns against those candidates that want to do something. They can effectively unseat them. But I do think that there is positive momentum coming out of this because we do have, organizations on the left and the right that are recognizing that the unions are a problem, including the ACLU. And there is one example in Camden, New Jersey. They faced a public safety crisis, and somehow they were effectively able to de-unionize the police force. They fired and rehired them as county employees instead. And they did that with great success. Instead of having a police agency that was effectively acting like a triage unit, they were able to double the number of police officers and shift to a community policing standard. They had a 2/3 reduction in homicides and a 95% reduction in the number of complaints against officers. So that's a great example of how you accomplish this. But we do still have to get over the barrier of those people who want to accomplish the reforms, being pushed back, being voted out of office by the unions that want to protect their police officers. In some instances, these are just protections that they're arguing for, but in other instances, as we've seen, they're not.
Look, it is fair to say that what you just said applies and can apply in just about any situation. Are there just protections? Absolutely. There are bad mayors, mayoral agencies out there. You look at a Bill de Blasio, you can understand why various unions are very protective of their members who are being thrown to the wolves based on the political ideology. But how are we supposed to trust? I understand that everybody's talking about it on both sides. Maybe not everybody, but various players players. The ACLU, which has become basically a left-wing organization, occasionally slips and falls into the correct argument, and that's a decades-long change in that organization. You look at the NAACP, they're a leftist organization for decades now. They're no longer trustworthy when it comes to these issues. So for those reasons, it's one thing to have a discussion, but it's what they want to do with it. If they tear down the unions, what do they replace it with?
Yeah, and you don't even necessarily have to tear down the unions, although I do think that we shouldn't have public sector unions to begin with. But what you really need to do is look at the provisions in those union contracts, and specifically when cities have time and again given away management rights. That's not the role of the unions. You know, if we want to ensure the safety of products that are being produced, we don't let groups that represent the workers who make those products be the ones that set the safety standards and control the consequences if they violate those standards. So it's the same thing with protecting our communities. We can't allow the police unions to control the circumstances and treatment if there are misconduct allegations, and we can't allow them to undermine decisions of police chiefs to remove problematic officers. We've seen a study where there were 1,881 police firings. That's not something that's easy to do. And yet 1 in 4 of those officers who were terminated were forced to be reinstated through union appeal processes. And that just undermines the authority of police chiefs. You know, in one case, San Antonio police chief was forced to reinstate an officer he fired not just once, but twice. So at the heart of all this is we can come up with any set of policies that we agree on, standards, training, but you have to get to the heart of those contracts and eliminate anything that is going to effectively make those new procedures, you know, null and void.
But then, to be fair, back to the protective side of this, you know, how do we, or maybe it's case by case or department by department, for that matter, they do deserve protections. I'm with you. I believe that public sector unions, government worker unions, should not exist. Hell, even Jimmy Carter agreed with us on that one, such as it is, because it's collective bargaining against the interests of those you serve. The principle, regardless of who disagrees with it or agrees with it, is the collective bargaining issue and against the goal of the existing organization. But that said, that's not going away. So how do we get it to the point of maybe proper protections for police officers and keep it there? Is that possible?
It's possible. You know, I think it takes time, though, too. And when we're at this heightened sensitivity right now, everybody wants to see immediate changes. And that's just not how this is going to play out. But, you know, I'm glad you brought up that police officers do need protection. And, you know, by and large, these are people who are heroes, who are putting their lives on the line to protect the communities in which they live and serve. And they do deserve some higher protections, considering